Welcome to another episode of The Hobby. Today we have the one and only Pokey Chloe joining us to talk about a very rare Chansey card and a very rare set of Pokemon cards. Chloe, how is it going today?
Yeah, very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm super excited for this episode. I've been thinking about it
Yes.
all day, honestly, because when I saw this card first show up in our premiere auction, I knew you were a huge Chansey fan and a huge fan of rare Pokemon cards and unusual Pokemon cards. And so I really wanted to talk to you about it. The card that we're talking about today is obviously the Chansey Snap card. I believe that's the way the cool kids say it, the Snap card. Is there
It's from
how
the Snap contest cards, so I think that's kind of what they're like. I think I mentioned to you before, they're kind of quite notable when you look at them. You can sort of tell straight away. There's several other Pokemon as well, but yeah, people refer to them as the Snap cards a lot of the time.
Okay, that's good to know. When we look at what the premier auction usually encompasses within the world of Pokemon cards, it's usually like, to be honest, it's usually like first edition Charizards. It's
Yeah.
cards that are high dollar, but also sort of really well recognized. But this card, like I said, when it came to me, maybe it's just my lack of knowledge, but I didn't know what it was. So can you maybe start by talking to us a little bit about why these Snap game cards are as sought after as they are?
Yeah, sure. So, like you said, with the Charizard, that's a set card. That's from the base set of Pokemon. That's a card that you could open a pack back in the day and you could pull that card out of a pack. When we're talking about, and like, don't get me wrong, First Edition Charizard, obviously in higher grade, is a rarer card. Obviously, they're harder to grade, they're vintage cards. But when we're talking about contest cards, they are what they say on the tin. They are the result of a contest that took place that was run by Pokemon or whoever. So we're talking about like the Koro comics in this case, Nintendo 64. So they're not cards that you could open a pack and pull them from. So obviously there's a lot less of them than there is, Charizards and the Chansey from base set, for example, which you could pull out of a pack as well. So because there being so little of them, and we've both had a little look at the description actually that you guys have got up, it explains the story really well. Because there's so little of them and actually not much known about some of them as well. Some of them haven't surfaced for years. It just, people love that sort of stuff. Anything that's like mysterious, hard to get hold of. And I think obviously if you're a particular Pokemon, lover, for example, I love Chansey. This for me would be an exciting card to hold, let alone own. So I think it just, the edge of like mystery around them and them just being rare for the fact there's just so little of them that exist is probably why it's such a big deal, basically.
Awesome. That's a great description. One of the things that we talk a lot about in the world of sports cards is that rarity matters. It's one of my favorite sayings. Rarity matters. But sometimes a card can be rare and unknown. It seems to me that
Yeah.
this is a case where the Pokemon community is becoming more and more educated, and people now realize maybe more than ever that these cards are rare and they're also known. So when you think about like the world of sort of like big time Pokemon cards, where did these Snap cards sort of fit in that hierarchy?
That's an interesting question because there are some people that, for example, might collect rare cards, but the Snap cards might not be of interest to them for whatever reason. It's like other trophy cards in the market. There are people that might only collect first edition set cards, and to them, that is their big goal and their big grail. I always say with Pokemon, it's kind of like an umbrella, and there's so many branches underneath it. Nothing kind of, there's no black and white, there's no right and wrong, and it's kind of like the collector's own perception on the card itself. So for example, if you've always wanted to get your hand on a Snap contest card, or you wanted to get your hands on a number one trainer from the World Championships or something like that, it's really going to depend on the person and the card itself, and then why they want it. And I think another thing that's interesting as well, for example, with this card, so talking about the Charizard, it's kind of really, sought after in that PSA 10 grade because it's quite hard to grade. It's a vintage card,
Sure.
etc. Whereas with regards to a Snap card, for example, they come up so they just don't come up at all ever really. So to own the card, a lot of the time, I personally, if I had the choice to own this, whether it was graded or not, it wouldn't bother me. Just owning this card, even raw, would just be, you know, out of this world. And I think a lot of the time, people grade these cards to, obviously, if there's the chance that it's going to get that really high grade, that's just that bonus. But just to encapsulate them, to protect them, and
Mm.
obviously, if they're considering holding it in their collection for a long time, it's just a special way to actually hold the card. So there's no real, when people say like hierarchy, obviously cards that are expensive, like trophy cards, first edition Charizards, all that sort of stuff, I suppose that creates the hierarchy with regards to how much they're worth. But
Mm.
for me personally, there'll be cards that some people think are insane, and yeah, they're really expensive, but for me, probably wouldn't be any interest, and then vice versa. It's all like a really individual opinion, and I'm sure it's the same with sports cards as well. Obviously, I know nothing about sports cards. I know that's your area of expertise, but that's my opinion anyway on Pokemon, but some people might see it differently.
It's kind of fun that we can come from two totally different worlds, speak part of the same
Yeah,
language about the hobby, and be so different in so many other ways.
yeah,
So you mentioned that like some cards can be really expensive, but they're not particularly of interest to you. Talk to me
yeah.
about this card in particular, and whether this card would be something that would be interesting to you.
Yeah, so like I said, Chansey's my favorite Pokemon. So I suppose the term grail card is what people would refer to this as, for example. So there's also a Snap Pikachu, a Snap Charmander. So say if there was a Charmander collector, someone loved Charmander, the Snap Charmander might be their grail version if they
Mhm.
were to get their hands on a Snap card. So for me, this would just be an insane card to, like I said, to hold one day, let alone actually own one, to have that in my collection. I have a small collection of Chansey cards, nothing crazy or wild, but they're cards that I love, and they're sort of my personal collection. They're not cards that I would sell for anything in the future. They're just ones that I've taken in. So if I had my, the chance to get my hands on something like this, that would just be part of my personal collection, and something I'd just get it out and look at it every now and then and take pictures of it just because I'd enjoy it. Obviously, the Snap contest, like I said before, there's so little of them, which is why they're so rare. And again, they become more sought after. But mine would, obviously, the reason I would be interested in this is because it is my favorite Pokemon, Chansey.
The
Whereas some people might like some of the other Snap cards because it's their favorite Pokemon.
the thing, another commonality that comes out here is that you can see sort of the glow as you talk about the card, right? Like
I'm
you
actually
love
looking, I've got it on my screen over there. I keep looking at it.
you love the card, and you love
Yeah.
the idea of, you've mentioned it two or three times, you love the idea of just being able to see one in hand.
Yeah.
So two questions: have you seen one in hand before, and when was the last time that you saw any card from this set sort of available for sale?
I've never seen one in hand before. I've never held a Snap card, let alone the Chansey. Earlier, I think it was earlier this year, the Snap Magikarp made an appearance and
Mhm.
came up for sale, and there was a lot of buzz around that because it had been years. These cards, as and if and when they do come up, there's then questions, is it actually that card because it's been so long since it's been seen. And I remember there being a lot of I personally didn't make any videos about it myself because basically, since getting back into the hobby, these are the sort of cards I've learnt about. Obviously, when I was a kid, I was opening up packs, and that's where my nostalgia and getting back into the hobby originally came from. But as an adult, you start exploring new areas, and I've learned about all these incredible sorts of cards. But yeah, I remember when the Magikarp came up, there was a lot of people making videos online, and it was just really interesting to watch everyone's sort of opinions and take on it. And also just people being in shock that these cards have like finally surfaced, like considering there's so little of them actually in existence.
I've got one more thought on rarity, and then I want to read just a little bit of our description. The thought that
Yeah,
I have on rarity is that, you know for a card to be worth a lot of money, it has to be somewhat rare, and that means there has to be more people who want it than can own it. And there's different
yeah,
ways to have something sort of achieve rarity status. One way is that it can be extremely difficult to grade, and there's only a few that are in that condition. Another
yeah,
way is, and we see this a lot in sports cards, is you have this real manufactured rarity where a card's serial numbered to 10 or 100 or something like that. But
right.
the other way that you get rarity is what we have here, which is where you have something that sort of organically came out of, a prize or a contest or some way that
Yeah.
wasn't mass produced, wasn't included in the packs. And then later, as the years go by, people realize how rare it is. And I think
Yeah.
that's the situation that we have here. From the
Yeah.
description, we learn that this was actually received through a contest. So I'm going to read just a little bit, and then I want to get
Yeah.
your thoughts
Go
on it.
for it. Yeah.
So it says, to enter Pokemon Snap, players were required to take photos in the game. That's the N64 game, and then bring their cartridges to their local Lawson, a Japanese convenience store chain. These stores were equipped with special printing machines that allowed players to print their Pokemon Snap photos into stickers, after which they would then affix their entry to a postcard and mail it along with their name, address, school grade, and phone number. Each
All of their
contest,
details.
I know there's so much to it. And before I even go on, like thinking about what this looked like only, 23 years ago, like the world has just changed so much in this time. Thinking about
Crazy.
this process is just hilarious. Am I right?
It is, because everything is so automated now. No one has to go anywhere to do anything anymore. Everything is online, everything's digital. So to think you had to go somewhere, write all your details down, print something off, put it back in the post, then send it off somewhere else, it just sounds crazy. But that's obviously, back then we didn't have the level of technology we do now. So we've just got kind of probably a bit lazy, but just used to being able for everything to be so easy. But it is really interesting to hear about the actual process that took place in order for this all to happen. It's really
Yeah.
interesting.
Great thoughts. I think the other thing that I'd highlight is you had to be able to have access to a Lawson's in Japan.
Yeah, as
And
well.
And so there were so many sort of things that had to happen right for you to even ever
Mhm.
have a chance at getting this card. I didn't grow up in Japan. I wouldn't have had it, wouldn't have had a chance, and most people wouldn't have. Um, just to continue, it says each contest selected 5 winners, and those that were chosen had to mail their Pokemon Snap game cartridges to Nintendo to confirm that they were the winning photo. The winning photo was actually theirs. Unbelievable. For the grand prize, all 10 winners had their submitted photos turned into Pokemon cards, with Koro winners being sent 20 copies of their card, while Mario 64 Stadium winners received just 15 apiece, which means there are 15 of this Chansey card in existence. And so, we can go on and on about why it's so cool and talk about it. The thing that is clear to me is that, again, as you look back at like the mid 90s and late 90s in the world of sports cards too, some of the things
Yeah.
that end up being the most interesting down the road are these stories where you didn't realize how cool it was when it initially came out, but later the real big time collectors, people like you, look at it and they say, oh, how cool it would be just to hold that in hand. So
Yeah,
I'm really
definitely.
excited. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Story there's a story there with it, so it's sort of, there's more to it than it just being, like I said, being pulled out of a pack or something like that. There's a whole process there.
Yeah. Last thing for me is it says original owners have, it says, as very few of their original owners have parted with them over the years. Can you imagine if you entered this big contest and you got these few cards that were given to you? Like, what would you do? Would you, I think I personally would have given them out to like friends and family and been like, hey, check
Yeah.
out this thing that I got. But I don't know. I suppose some people might have just kept all 15 of them. What would you have done?
It's hard because it's always like, in hindsight, I would have done this, but no one knew what was going to happen. No one knew what the future holds with anything, let alone back then. So I imagine, especially if some of these entrants were younger as well, like you say, if you win something, you want to show people, you maybe give a few to your friends and things like that. And then there may be some people that thought, you know what, I'm just going to hold on to these. This is a really cool thing. But it's really hard. It's hard to know what you would and wouldn't do depending on like the situation. But you can sort of understand then, say for example, the winner gets either 20 or 15, depending what contest they were in. And then what they chose to do with some of them, and then whether they kept any of them like themselves. And then it's sort of, you start to understand why these are so rare and why they only appear every so often, because no one actually knows how many, or the actual quantity of each of them and where they even are now.
Last question for me, Chloe. Why Chansey?
Chansey, I don't know if it's just, so for example, when I was involved in Pokemon when I was a kid, it was when base set was out. So I was opening Pokemon packs 7 or 8 years old, and it was the start of Pokemon. So obviously Chansey in base set, and I was just obsessed with Chansey when I was younger. So I think that's when I got back into it as an adult and I started to put a personal collection together. I said to myself, I want, you know, Chansey slabs. I think that would be a really cool thing. And then I've started to get modern Chansey cards within my collection. It's not obviously all just vintage. And it's kind of stuck with me. I just love Chansey. Whereas like some people, you know, it'll be Pikachu or Charizard. And, you know, maybe some of the kids these days, it will be, you know, newer gens rather than, you know, going all the way back. But yeah, I don't know really. It's some people do ask me like, what is it about Chansey? Obviously, compared to Charizard, who, you know, is that sort of like stronger character. I just love Chansey. I think Chansey's just like me, really.
I love that description. He's just like me. Anything else you want to say about the card or about the set before we go?
No, just that it's an incredible card and it's such a cool thing to see this come up. Like I said, it just doesn't happen often at all. So whoever ends up getting the card, just make sure you look after it because it's amazing. But yeah, no, it's incredible to see these things when they do appear. And it obviously being Chansey is even better.
I wish you weren't, you know, all the way in England. It would have been nice to have you
I
in
know.
Oregon when
It's
I
a
got
bit
to,
too
because I
far.
did. I got to pull it out. I got to look at it, hold it in hand, and
Oh,
of course, me being somebody who just doesn't know anything about it, I looked at it and I went,
I'm
I should have
jealous.
thought. I should have thought, oh, I better message Chloe real quick and see what she knows about this. And I
Oh
actually
my.
did think, I know she really likes but I just didn't know at the time. So anyway, you know, for anybody who's looking to understand more about Pokemon, they want to follow somebody who's really a fun follow, who does breaks, who does all sorts of great, really smart content in the Pokemon community, would strongly suggest checking out Poke Chloe. Chloe, you've been an awesome guest. Thank you so much for being on this episode of The Hobby. And until next time, happy collecting.